Hey, everybody, welcome to a very special episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and I have assembled here. Listen, look at these guys representing. I don't even have my own merch on. That's awesome. So now I know where another one of those Def Leppard type shirts went. I mean, the logo that doesn't look like Def Leppard at all went. Yeah, we've got a very, very special panel here. You've seen all of these guys before, but never together. We've got Jex Russell, Matthew Phillips, John Clauser from My Music Corner. So, I mean, like Jex, Matt, it's usually Jex, Matt, Will, and I when we, quote unquote, get the band together. Will couldn't make it, but so we got John, and he rose to the challenge. What are we doing today? We're going back 30 years. 30 years. 1994 is 30 years ago. Wow. Yeah, 1994 was a crazy year for music, a huge year of transition and upheavals. And, for me, just growing up, it was finished post-secondary education and working jobs, and it was an interesting time, a little bit of everything. So what we're going to do on this episode is count down our top 10 albums from 1994 with some honorable mentions. And I know that we're going to have a crazy variety. We're going to have a crazy variety of music on here because we're all coming at this from slightly different angles. It's been, our chat going on before filming this. Matt has been good-naturedly teasing me because I was one of those people that really struggled with the grunge era because I was not into it. I was not into the dour, depressing of the whole thing. And man, did it ever do a number on much of the music that I liked. Man, it knocked a lot of these bands down several pegs. Some never quite recovered, but there was a lot of good music all around. Some of us went in other directions, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the variety that we're going to have on here. It's going to be a lot of fun. So what we're going to do, we're going to go in order as I see these gentlemen on my screen right now. And so we're going to start with any honorable mentions we might have. We're going to go around, then we'll get into the top 10. So don't spend a lot of time in the honorables, just kind of mention them really quick, and we'll take it from here. We're going to start with Mr. Jex of Distortion Den, Grab a Stack of Rock fame, and wherever fine podcasts are found. Jex, what are your honorables for 1994? I'm sure you remember it well. What, you were 9?
Yeah, I turned 9 in 94. So this is one of the rare ones that I was actually alive. A lot of the years we look at, I wasn't even born yet. So this has got a nice change. 3 honorable mentions for me, real quick. I didn't even bring physical copies. Dream Theater, Awake, Bad Religion, Stranger Than Fiction, and Soundgarden, Super Unknown. Those would be my 3 honorable mentions that didn't make the cut.
All right. Matt, yours is going to be all over the place. Can't wait. What are your honorables, man?
I've got 5 honorable mentions. I'm going to start with ZZ Top's album from 1994. This came out in January. The big song on here that you might know is Pincushion. This is kind of a return to less programmed sound, we'll say, from ZZ Top. My number 14 is one I actually just bought within the last few years. It's Pride and Glory's self-titled, only one I believe the only record they ever put out. This is, of course, a Zakk Wylde side project, or his main project at the time. So it's, your acoustic-y, country, bluesy, tiny bit folky kind of project. So, yeah, I really like this one, but I had no idea or had never listened to this back in the day.
More on that maybe a little later.
Right on. My number 13 is an album I think someone else might be talking about. This is Cinderella's Still Climbing. Look at the color of this CD, the purple. I'd never seen something like this before. Really enjoyed listening to this one. I don't listen to it very often. That's why it's in my honorables. But, Bad Attitude Shuffle comes down. I'll save someone else to talk about that later. My number 12 is Queensryche's Promised Land. Let me see here. That was their 5th studio album. would you say this has got a little bit of alternative sound to it, Tim?
Especially in the production.
Yeah.
It's a little stripped down, but much more on that later.
And my final honorable mention is Bruce Dickinson's second solo album. He was actually still in Iron Maiden at the time here. This is Balls to Picasso. The song that made me buy this was actually the very last song. It's called Tears of the Dragon. It's a song that he had been writing with another writing partner for a completely different project. It almost sounded, well, it didn't sound Iron Maiden-y at all. And he finally came back together, wrote some songs with this Roy Z, and this is what came out of it, Balls to Picasso. I've seen this one at my local record store for $30 on vinyl, so I think I really want to pick that up. But yeah, those are my honorable mentions.
$30 for that? That's not bad.
Yeah, on vinyl.
Not bad. Okay, all right, John.
All right.
What are your
All right,
honors
thank you.
for 1994?
All right. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for doing this. Yeah, so my honorable mentions, two of them would be from stuff that I know I was listening to, and two was stuff that I discovered later on. First one, Eric Clapton's From the Cradle, basically just a blues cover album, is him doing the blues. Go figure that out. Nativity in Black, the tribute to Black Sabbath. So all the big super groups get together for this. You got Biohazard, you got White Zombie, you got Megadeth, you got Ozzy with a band called Therapy, Corrosion of Conformity. You got all kinds of groups doing Black Sabbath. Those were the ones I know I was listening to back in the day. Now, two bands that one I would love to start a deep dive on. One thing you'll notice on my music corner, I've been doing some deep dives on a couple of bands lately. Right now we're doing Judas Priest, but one band I would love to do is a fellow Canadian band, Saga.
Oh,
Steel
very cool.
Umbrellas.
Very
so
cool.
I haven't listened to this one in a little while, but I know Say Goodbye to Hollywood made that acoustic unplugged album they did, which the name is escaping me. But anyway, that was a really good album. I have always loved Saga, and I just need to really do a deeper dive. And then I know Tim's going to talk about this one in honor of the marathon series on April Wine, of course, Frigate. Although I will say I liked its predecessor better, and I think I liked its album after it a little bit better. But this was still a good one. So those would be my four honorable mentions.
Very cool, John. Yeah, Saga's a band I could see me getting into. I do like some of their songs, but yeah, it's intimidating. That's a huge catalog, right? Because they never really stopped putting out albums,
Nope.
But yeah, cool, very cool. All right, so my honorable mentions real quick. Some of these, well, we'll just start with one of the more ill-fated albums to come out in 1994, Diamond Dave, Your Filthy Little Mouth. Now, this is not, I'm not crazy about this album. It's produced by Nile Rodgers. It's all over the place stylistically. He's got Travis Tritt on here doing a song called Cheatin' Heart Cafe. He's got a reggae song on here. But the first single, the song I remember hearing, of course, I was in radio broadcasting at the time, so I had access to all the sampler discs that came in. And the first single and the first song on it was called She's My Machine, which is really good. It's really classic Van Halen sounding with like just one guitar and bass. And, you could picture Mike Anthony on the background vocals. But unfortunately, the album doesn't hold up. As Van Halen's continued to do really well with Sammy, Dave struggled as a solo artist. This album was in the delete bins within a year. Canadian artist, Kim Mitchell, a really odd album called Itch. Hate this album cover, really ugly. It's got some good songs on it. I mean, Kim never really did do a bad album, but it's not one of my favorites. Just wanted to mention it real briefly. One that I'm actually just ordered and I'm waiting on getting the CD. Hard to find. Like this band, their albums are on so many different labels and they're so fractured. But I did want to give this album a mention. This is Great White, Sail Away. And this cassette actually contains, like, side one is the Sail Away album, and side two is actually Anaheim Live. And I think the CD I'm getting is like that too. As a matter of fact, It could be all of the CD versions are like that. I'm not sure. But this album, surprisingly, given the climate, 1994, the title song from this album, which is primarily acoustic, good song, went all the way to number 8 on the Billboard Mainstream Rock Chart, which is pretty impressive given the time. But yeah, wanted to give that a quick mention. Was a happy day for me when I heard one of my favorite rock and roll voices return to the airwaves of the song called You'd Better Wait. Steve Perry for The Love of Strange Medicine, his second album, 10 years after his first one, Street Talk. You Better Wait's a fantastic song. The album as a whole it's not that great. It's a lot of slow stuff on it, as you might expect. But Young Hearts Forever is a cool song, which is actually kind of a tribute to Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy. I didn't know that. Yeah, it's worthwhile, but mainly that first song, Missing You, is so good. One interesting thing about this is that this album contains Paul Taylor, who was in Winger on this at the time. And Steve had co-written a bunch of songs with Nuno Bettencourt. For some reason, none of them made this album. I would have liked to have heard the results of those two collaborating. And my last honorable mention, talk about delete. This is like the king of the delete bins at that time. You could find this album dirt cheap. Cheap Trick, Woke Up with a Monster. Their one and only album on Warner Brothers, their one and only album produced by Ted Templeman. I think there's some good songs on here. The song Tell Me Everything could have been a hit if it had been released a few years earlier. Great mid-tempo ballad. There's some good stuff on here. It's just, it came out at totally the wrong time. Was reading Ted Templeman's book that Greg Renoff did. There was a huge upheaval at Warner Brothers at the time, and the album just got lost. And this was, that was kind of the end of their major label days, kind of. Those are my honorable mentions. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty, as it were. We're going to go over to Jex and talk about his number 10 for 94.
All right, my number 10 might be a first for Tim's Vinyl Confessions, or if this band has been brought up at all, it was probably by me. It's probably gonna surprise people because this is a band I really like, but you wouldn't know it. Spin Doctors, Turn It Upside Down.
Wow,
Tim, that album cover.
Yeah. So I love this one because it continues on with the funk rock that they were doing on their debut, Pocket Full of Kryptonite, which is an album I love. I like it better than this one, but this one's not too far off. But listening to it for this, in preparation for this, one thing I noticed is a big problem I have with it is the sequencing of the songs. Because the first half or so, it's really catchy, really upbeat. You're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then it just slows down for most of the second half. So I could only imagine listening to it on cassette, like side one would be really like, all right. And side two is like, oh, okay. And it goes on for a little too long. I think it's 14 tracks on here. It could have been trimmed down. I find it after a while, I was like, okay, I'm fine now. I'm good for something else. But the songs that rock are really good. Like, let's see. It's hard to pick a favorite, but I like Cleopatra's Cat, Hungry Hamed's is good, and Biscuit Head. So yeah,
I'm not laughing at you, Jax. It's just Matt and I, the Spin Doctors. That's just such a college band.
Oh yeah, I believe that. I believe that.
But mostly it's all about the first album, and the songs on that. But yeah, I remember being in starting to work in radio when that came out, and I remember thinking Cleopatra's Cat was such an odd choice for a first single.
Oh, was that their first single? I didn't even know.
That was the first single, and then they put out I think it's called "You Let Your Heart Go Too Fast," which sounds exactly like something that could have been on their the first album. And then they put the song Mary Jane out, which is kind of a slower one. I remember playing all of those songs when I'm working in radio, coming in on the Sony samplers. But yeah, that album didn't do very well at all. That was kind of it for the Spin Doctors. I mean, unfortunately, they had that one album that had all those hit singles off it, sold all those copies, and that was kind of it. I mean, they were kind of an exception in the alternative. They were kind of alternative, but they were up for the most part. It was upbeat. The songs on that first album get a little overcooked, but that's really interesting that you're bringing. I think it's the first time Spin Doctors have been brought up, and no one talks about that second album of theirs. So
I know.
Good choice.
Thank you.
All right, Matt's number 10.
I just want to
Spin Doctors.
I was laughing. That album cover reminds me of Extreme Saudage Rock.
Oh, it totally does. Yeah.
Yeah, I see it. And one thing I forgot to mention, kind of a pet peeve, not really, but you have to read the tracks like they go in like a square motion.
That is so 90s. That's
Right?
so 90s. Album cover design, and I hate it.
It's like
Are there
like
pictures? Are,
reissues.
when you look inside of the CD booklet, are there pictures of the band as kids? Because that was a pretty common trope
Yeah.
too.
Hold on, talk amongst yourselves. I'm gonna look.
Yeah. All right, go ahead, Matt. We're gonna let Jex find that out. No, okay.
So I just wanted to say quickly, so 1994 was a pretty life-changing year for me too, as well as with Tim. We both graduated from our programs. I was in the journalism program, so that summer we graduated, and then I had to realize, oh, I don't get summers off anymore. I actually have to work for a living now. And 1994 was my first trip, and actually the only trip so far I made to the UK. That summer had to work, and then that fall I basically said goodbye to all my family and friends and moved about 16 hours away to the province of Ontario, living by myself for the first time, like really far away from family. So it was quite a life-changing year. Going into my list here, number 10 is actually an album by Megadeth that came out in November. I think it's their fifth or sixth studio album. So this is back when artist Hugh Syme was slumming it, designing covers for Megadeth. He's doing more pivotal work for Tim Derling now, but this is their 1994 album Euthanasia.
Slumming it.
Yeah, slumming it. This is actually one of my favorite Megadeth albums. So you've got your Dave Mustaine, David Ellefson on bass, Marty Friedman's back on guitar, and Nick Menza on drums. I really love the way this one kicks off with Reckoning Day. This is like, and basically I won't do too much singing here. I know people hate that, but I really like the kind of groove on the record. Of course, the songs that are really familiar are like "A Tout le Monde." That's got a French lyric about a. I'm not sure if this was about someone specific, but it's a man writing basically a farewell message to all of his friends and family, and it uses a little bit of French. "A tout le monde, tous mes amis, je vous aime, je dois partir." So it's basically saying goodbye. I love "The Killing Road," "Elysian Fields," "Train of Consequences," but I don't know if this is my favorite Megadeth album, but it's pretty close. So that's number 10, Euthanasia.
Nice. I need to get that one. It's one that I'm missing.
Yeah, Megadeth's one of those bands after like So Far So Good, So What? I kind of got off the political Dave train for a while. I've kind of come back to it a little bit better, and I like a lot of the Megadeth stuff, but Euthanasia is not one I've listened to that much. So yeah, good stuff. All right, well, 1994 for me, it was an interesting year because I had to look at what came out that year because I'm like, I'm old, people. I have no I don't remember much anymore. I'm not like Jex here. So anyway, so I had to look up and I'm like, okay, what did I really listen to in 94? I'm thinking, wow, I didn't really listen to a whole lot, did I? This is going to make for a very boring show for me, but thankfully I was able to come up with some other things that I discovered since then. However, my first pick, this was just a continuation of a love of a guitar player that I fell in love with in the 80s, was very anxious to learn his licks as I was taking guitar lessons, and just started going deeper and deeper into that music. And even though the band he was in that all these licks were from were no longer together, at least he got back together with Robert Plant. And so I was grooving on No Quarter quite a lot. Half unplugged, half reimagining of a lot of Zeppelin songs. You have that really spacey version of Nobody's Fault But Mine. You get a more you get the nice laid back versions of Gallows Pole, and the Indian and flavored Battle of Evermore and Kashmir and Four Sticks and Hala and all those different songs. I loved listening to just how they were imagining the Zeppelin songs again. Jimmy Page has always been one of my favorite guitar players, and and it's just his licks and his studio mastery always has astounded me. So that's my first. And I have the DVD. I don't, for some reason, I don't have a CD of this, but yes, No Quarter, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant.
it's funny. I got to get that. I've never had that on CD. I don't know why. And I've never heard really anything off that second album they did, the Walking Through Clarksdale. But I have seen. I remember. I think it was with Matt watching the probably the VHS of the show. And yeah, Thank You and Gallows Pole both got a lot of radio play. And I really like the version of Gallows Pole on there. And there's what, 6? How many new songs were on that? 4, 5,
City
6?
Don't Cry. Let's see. Wonderful One. There was
Oh.
one that they did called Hala or Wawa or something like that.
But in record,
Um,
I think they were just sort of.
yeah. Yeah, it's this is pretty fun, but yeah, the CD is really enjoyable too. So
Yeah, so Matt brought up a really good point. I mean, Matt and I got to know each other in it was community college, and we took different courses, but still under the umbrella of communication arts. So we had a lot of classes in common. So that's how we got to be friends. We're friends to this day. But yeah, I mean, 1994 started out. I mean, it was the second half of our second year. Graduated, and then it was, hey, get out in the working world. Like it was really it was weird, you know. And I remember, actually, I do remember towards the end of the summer, I went down to visit Matt, and we ended up going to his family's cottage, Flume Ridge, which is like, you know, we talk about the Flume all the time, and painted a gigantic Kiss logo on this bridge that's no longer there. I mean, got some spray. I mean, a huge Kiss logo, like the letters taller than me. But I do remember driving. I'm pretty sure we were driving into the nearest town to go, you know, get some milk or something, right? And we saw a school bus, and it was the first time it dawned on us, hey, you know, it's back to school. And I remember thinking, that would suck. I was perfectly happy to be done with that, but yeah, very transitional year. So my number 10 is a CD. I wasn't into the band at the time. I got out of the band many years later, but there was one song that got played on we still had a local rock radio station. Actually, the station I worked for actually played the song, but the album was not a successful one. It was Yes and Talk, with this really weird Peter Max artwork. It always looked like bugs or something, these blobby kind of letters. This was the next thing that come out of the Union album, which was, I've gone on record saying it's my least favorite Yes album on the Contrarians, but it was back to the 80s lineup, the 90125 Big Generator lineup, and this is the last time that lineup recorded. But the first song, The Calling, really good upbeat rock song from them, and it got a lot of airplay. Real Love's a good one. State of Play is kind of heavy. It was not successful. It was on Victory Music, which was distributed by Polygram, and that label went under. So it didn't, you know, any of the acts on that label didn't stand much of a chance. As far as Yes albums go, I'd never put it in my top 10, but it's not bad. I actually, you know, was kind of got into, you know, I could see me of liking the more commercial Yes that started in '83. So this is just a continuation of that, but not a bad album, but it's down at number 10. So it's not favorite. So now over to Jex for his number 9.
All right. This might be another first for Tim's Vinyl Confession. 1994 was a strange year, like you all said. You know, like all the other by the year lists we've done is a lot of hard rock, a lot of heavy metal, easy to choose. When I looked at the list for 94, I'm like, man, I don't even know. This is outside of the box, a lot of them. This one included. This is Beastie Boys with Ill Communication. And I got into this one later down the line. I think 2012, summer 2012 was when I found this CD at a flea market. Obviously, I knew the hits. You got big ones on here. You got Sure Shot, Root Down, Sabotage, probably one of their most successful songs.
One of the best videos ever made.
Yes, directed by Spike Jonze. It's everything about it is perfect, from the fake mustaches to just the general feel of the video.
I want to watch that TV show.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, not much more to say. I like this era of the Beastie Boys. They were getting very experimental. I mean, they started to get experimental with the album before this Check Your Head from '92, but they really continued that here. They have a maturity too. I find, like, in their lyrics, there's a maturity to the band. Like, especially there's one lyric that MCA says, I want to say a little something that's long overdue. The disrespect to women has got to be through. To all the mothers and the sisters and the wives and friends, I want to offer my love and respect to the end. I've always admired that. I've loved that lyric, especially if you listen to their older stuff, specifically the song Girls from their debut album. Does not age well. So it was nice to kind of see them mature and say, hey, we're not about that anymore. So
What is that old one that Much Music used to play called She's On It?
oh yeah.
That's not the most
No, exactly.
PC.
No. So it's
Yeah.
kind of cool to hear them kind of, they're not about that anymore. And yeah, what else could I say? Oh, so many feels here. You got like they go back to their punk roots with the songs Tough Guy and Heart Attack Man, really like punk songs. You get quite a bit of jazz fusion because the band was inspired a lot by Miles Davis at this time. I've learned and this is apparent in the instrumental songs. There's Sabrosa, Futterman's Rule, Eugene's Lament, Ricky's Theme, Shambhala, and Transitions. So you see there's 20 tracks on here, but those are all like short instrumentals, which I thought gave a good feel. And yeah, favorites on me for here are Sure Shot, Sabotage, Get It Together, which features Q-Tip of A Tribe Called Quest, All Right Hear This, Flute Loop, and Do It, which features Biz Markie. So yeah,
It's Marquee.
Biz Markie, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, they're pretty tight. He was tight with the Beastie Boys, so yeah.
Nice.
Is that a Rick
Uh,
Rubin too?
They were on Capitol at that point. I don't think they were on. That wasn't a Def Jam thing. I don't think.
Yeah, they might have been. I'm trying to think of who would have produced it.
You know what? It's not obvious. Usually it says produced by, and I'm not seeing it anywhere.
90s packaging.
Yeah, exactly. At least I don't have to turn this one at least.
Yeah. Cool. That might be the first time Beastie Boys has been mentioned. It may have been, unless you talked about License to Ill in 1986.
That was an honorable mention, I'm pretty sure. But
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Beastie Boys produced it with Mario Caldado Jr.
Ah, there you go. Thank you,
Wow.
John.
Just looked it up.
That is not a name I recognize.
No.
Okay.
Well,
all right. So Matt's number 9.
Yeah, my number 9, we're going to talk about another band that's never been featured, as far as I know, on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I was looking at my list here, my top 10. I would say at least 5 of these are albums. A while back, I made my own kind of personal, here's my 100 favorite albums of all time. And 5 of these are on that list. This one, however, is not on the list. I really love this record, but it's one I really have to be in a mood for. And I actually, while listening to it at home, I had my headphones on. So this is Nine Inch Nails, their album, The Downward Spiral, came out in March of 1994. Now, I actually didn't get into Nine Inch Nails for a few years. I kind of came at them backwards. Tim might know something a little bit about this. So this album came out in 94. And it was really popular with game developers. One of my favorite games, I've been a video gamer all my life. I still play video games all the time on consoles, computer, handheld, whatnot. But one of my favorite games of all time is Quake. Now, I can't show you the actual boxed artwork or the anthology this came off of because it's actually framed on my wall in my office. But long story short, Trent Reznor, because the game developers heard his music, they wanted his music for their newest first 3D game called Quake, which came out in 1996. And in fact, they actually developed a weapon in the game called the 9 Inch Nail gun that had the little NIN logo on it.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so I actually didn't get into this band until January of 1997, well after I'd already been into the game. Now let's go back and who made this really strange, like really creepy music? Well, The Downward Spiral, it's not an album that you can listen to and be happy. There's just no other way. It was recorded in the house where the Tate LaBianca murders happened in California. So there's a little bit of creepy Manson kind of overshadowing the album. My favorite songs in here, I think it's fairly heavy loaded at the front. Starts off with Mr. Self-Destruct, which is, the sounds of someone getting beaten. The song Piggy slows it right down. And of course, when you mentioned Piggy, Charles Manson and pigs and that's a real deep rabbit hole to go down into. Probably my favorite track on here is number 3, Hearsay, but it's Trent's really trying to push buttons, especially with people that are religious. So we won't get into that. A lot of this stuff, so I've mentioned it's very not positive, but it wouldn't work if the music wasn't catchy too. So I find a lot of these songs actually have some really cool melodies. The ones people would probably know the most are track 5 is Closer. It's kind of a I don't want to say sexual song, but anyway. And the very last song is one that was covered by Johnny Cash. I think most people know this song, Hurt. So covered by Johnny Cash, I think not even a year before his death. So a lot of people know that version was pretty popular. I think that even it must have made a top 10 song. So anyway, that's my number 9, 9 Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral.
Cool.
Yeah, Trent's gone on record saying, yeah, that's Johnny's song now. Yes, that's not my song anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, even though I wouldn't call Nine Inch Nails grunge, I don't think that they would have succeeded in any other era. The doors were open to alternative, ways of being, like, aggressive music and stuff. Guys is a dark genius for sure. Yeah.
All right, my number 9.
Yes.
So back to 94 for me. Again, the reason my list was so small was because I was working a full-time job that kept me busy a lot. But we also had a community of friends that we did a lot of stuff together with. And we were just always, we were always doing like comic book shows or, doing this or watching movies. We were always together, but music always didn't play a big role in a lot of that. So I didn't get to experiment with a lot of the stuff of the day. But the bands that I was into, when they would release new material, of course, I would have to jump on. And I think this album from 1994, this was this band's 3rd album. Maybe a band that's probably never been talked about on Tim's channel. I don't know this for sure, but on my music corner, we just did December was devoted to this band, and Dangerous Toys with their 3rd album called Pissed.
Nice.
They were at this point, they were booted, they were taken off Columbia. They were on the Columbia Records, and they were basically full of piss and vinegar on this one. You have a lot of happy-go-lucky characters in those first 2 albums. Well, those happy-go-lucky got ticked off on this album because the title track is a great track. Pain Train's a really good groover. Promise the Moon is a kind of a bitter ballad, but it's just got a nice sound to it. Hard Luck Champion worked a song that sounded great for the time period. Illustrated Man was another kind of sign of the times, but another really good rocking song. But yeah, Jason and the Boys is this was a really good solid album, about 40 minutes long. You didn't need to have a 72-minute CD from Dangerous Toys. Yeah, this one just short, sweet, to the punch, boom.
I'm trying to remember if Bug talked about them on our 1989 episode, even briefly, but anyway, that's the lost. It's back there. It's researchable. Cool. All right. So my number 9 is a band that did really remarkably well considering the times. I mean, traditional hard rock, melodic hard rock. A lot of these bands were really. It was such a weird time because you had bands that were still on major labels, and it was time for them to release a new album, but everybody was cringing because it's like there's no way. So fall of 94, 2 bands that I loved, and 2 bands that both came out at the same time and were almost kind of keeping pace with releasing albums, came out with new albums. One Matt's already mentioned, and one I'm going to talk about later. Unfortunately, one of these bands put an album out and it sunk without a trace. And the band I'm about to show you, my number 9, put an album out. It went top 20 and eventually went gold. And I do not know how. So we're back to Hugh Syme again. Tesla's charmingly titled, well, there it is. And that's not an expression I was familiar with in 1994, to be quite honest. I really like the album art design on this. It's like this schematic of this elaborate sort of nutcracker. And I'll open up the CD because I'm assuming that if you were to find this on vinyl, which I do not have, it would have the full diagram of this, you know.
Hugh Syme and the Mechanics once again.
Yeah, it's almost it's not steampunk, but it's kind of pointing the direction to that. But yeah, it's not the last time we'll be talking about Hugh's artwork either. But this album came out. It was still, they're still on Geffen at this point. This album, I listened to it a few days ago. I'm surprised by how heavy it is. Like, it's not. Tesla eventually got into they picked up a little bit of twang along the way. There's no twang here, except on some of the acoustic songs. But when the songs are heavy, they're really heavy. Like Action Talks, like Earth Mover, Shine Away. Now, the one song that I cannot listen to is Try So Hard. I hate that song. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. It's a weak song. I have no idea how it got that far off the drawing board. There were, of course, no hits off this album, but there were a couple of videos. The first single was a song called Mama's Fool, which is a really heavy drop D song. Really, really cool. That's when I knew they had a new album out. I hadn't heard a thing about Tesla because the last time they came out with an album was 91, Psychotic Supper. So here we are 3 years later with everything changed, right? Got an MCA sampler disc at work, and well, what do you know? It's got a new Tesla song on it. The song Need Your Lovin' was also a single and a video, but you know, like I said, it went gold. So I don't know how that happened, but it did really well. The band were to break up. I remember reading about them and Extreme breaking up around the same time. Of course, they would both eventually reunite. But there you go. Surprisingly strong showing given the time for Tesla. A gold album in 94 and a good one. Not the easiest one to find, actually. So there you go. So over to Jex with number 8.
Okay. Now this
Keep the surprises coming. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is a band that's it's been mentioned on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. It's a very popular band. Not the most successful album, I don't think, but I think it's fantastic. It's Walk On from Boston, released on June 7th, 1994. I like this album a lot. I think a lot of that has to do with the nostalgia. I remember my buddy Pla introducing me to this down the line. This is like early 2010. I remember we went for a drive. He brought his CDs. Like, you know Boston? I'm like, yeah, I know, like the debut, the More Than the Feeling, and all that stuff. He's like, no. You ever heard Walk On? I'm like, no. So he puts on the medley, which is like 11 minutes. It's broken into 4 tracks, but it's like an 11-minute epic, very progressive. I was like, well, this is amazing. The guitar work just blew me away. So I was an instant fan of Walk On. And I think it's a very consistent album. If you compare it to their earlier stuff, you know, the debut or even Don't Look Back, I think it's very consistent sounding. Of course, Tom Schultz, he shines as always here on many instruments, but mainly lead guitar, keyboards, and organs. Not being a big Boston connoisseur, I never realized that original guitarist Brad Delp isn't on the album. He doesn't appear on the album. He's replaced by Fran Cosmo. But the likeness is incredible. I mean, if you ask me now that I know, I could probably hear the differences, but I thought it was Brad Delp. I never knew. So I just learned that recently. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I talked about the Walk On medley. That's just such a progressive journey. I love that song. Other highlights are I Need Your Love, Surrender to Me, and We Can Make It. So that is my number 8, Walk On.
All right, Matt's number 8.
My number 8 is the second album, Stone Temple Pilots. It's called Purple. This one came out on June 7th. They've always had some rather strange album covers that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the music, but so you can read Stone Temple Pilots there in the bottom right corner. It features Chinese artwork of a baby, right? Mythical creature. I think it's called a Chi Lin. And then purple is here in a Chinese character on the front of the album. Now it's sort of subtitled 12 Gracious Melodies, which is kind of funny because you look on the track listing and there's 11 tracks. Well, there's a hidden track on here called The Second Album, and it's got this guy doing like jazzy song at the end. And you're like, what? Going on. Anyway, most people know this album from the singles, Vaseline. Of course, you've got the very famous, I think, a #1 hit at the time, Interstate Love Song. I know the album itself went in at #1 on Billboard. It does have a lot of grungy kind of stylings on it, so we're still in '94. We're not quite at the post, but one of the things I wanted to point out. So you've got the DeLeo brothers, Dean and Robert, all the music for Stone Temple Pilots. Most people would, when you think about Stone Temple Pilots, you think of those kind of meaty, grungy, and of course Scott Weiland, the front man, who's no longer with us. But Robert DeLeo, the younger brother, the bass player, actually writes a lot of their most famous songs. He actually wrote by himself Interstate Love Song. He wrote the riff to Vaseline. And a lot of my favorite parts on this album are some of the like the more intricate, almost he's got like he's trained in jazz, he's trained in classical, he plays bass, but he's also really at electric guitar and acoustic guitar. So Robert brings a lot to this band. Anyway, that's my #8, Stone Temple Pilots, Purple.
Interstate Love Song is just such a great song. I mean, they weren't all out grunge. I don't know what you'd call STP, but that song is just undeniable. That's just a good rock song that would have probably made it in any era. It's kind of not undeniable, but you get it in your head and it stays there, and it's just fun. Yeah. Okay, so
All right.
John's #8.
All right. Well, Matt alluded to this one earlier. So this was an album. I picked it up in '94, probably listened to it once or twice. And then just like a lot of my CDs I was getting at the time, got put on the collection and just never got touched again until somebody suggested, well, it was John the Music Nut that suggested, hey, why don't we do this for your show and just look at this album? I'm like, okay, yeah, we could do that. It's been a while since I've listened to it. And boy, I'm glad I picked this back up again.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, you got some southern sounding people from a guy from New Jersey. I don't know how he dares that. But anyway, I mean, come on, Losing Your Mind, great track, Horse Cold War, Sweet Jesus, Crimea River. I mean, Machine Gun Man, there's so many great tracks on this. Goodness gracious. When John and I were preparing for this show, it was just so much fun to just revisit again. So yeah, that's gonna be my #8. Pride and Glory. I'm gonna keep mine short and sweet. Anybody wants to see what I really think of it, look on my Music Corner stuff. We do a show on it. You can hear all about it from there.
John, have you ever checked out his Book of Shadows project? If you like that Pride and Glory, you should definitely check out Zach did Book of Shadows 1 and 2, and I think you can get them as a collection too.
I have it. I thought I had it handy, but I don't have it handy. But yes, I do have it, and we are going to eventually talk about that one.
Interesting story about that first Pride and Glory album. A few years ago, when I say a few, probably 4, 5, 6 years ago, not that long ago, I remember being at my local Walmart, and it must have been a reissue.
Yes.
And I saw that Pride and Glory. I thought, what an odd album to see on Walmart shelves. I'm like, that must be well distributed. Yeah, that threw me for a loop. So my #8 is actually this is cool because in a little over a couple of months' time, Matt and I, along with Matt's longtime friend Chris, are going to see Mr. Jeff Tate live in concert. Now, I've never seen any incarnation of Queensryche in concert, so I'm really looking forward to this in Portland, and there will be a report on that, rest assured. But yeah, #8 is Queensryche's Promised Land album. More slumming, as Matt already said. I think that this would look, and I don't have it, but I think this would look really cool on vinyl. Matter of fact, not to toot my own horn too much, but interesting color scheme to this album. Looks rather
Looks a
looks
little
rather
familiar.
yeah. I always thought,
Recycled.
when Hughes artwork came back, I'm like, geez, it looks like could be a Queensryche album, and I had no problem with that. Yeah, this album is very, very different. It came, 4 years after the release of Empire, and a lot had changed musically. Oddly enough, I mean, Queensryche is a Seattle band, and they probably knew all these guys behind the scenes as this scene was developing. But it is different for them, and I'm not going to say they went grunge, but it is very different. I mean, Empire was very commercial, and dare I say that's their pop album, even though there's the heavy stuff on it, but it's not The Warning or the EP. But the first single that came off Promised Land was the song I Am I, which almost has some of Eastern influences, a little bit like the Page and Plant, and very, very interesting kind of song. It's the type of thing that you would think that maybe I would have hated it, but I've always liked it. It got a fair bit of airplay. I know Much Music played the video all the time, and I think it did well on mainstream rock. Another song from that album, and I should have gotten it out because Matt sent me this once Matt was living in Ontario. The single Bridge, which is a great acoustic song, really sad song that Chris DeGarmo wrote about his father, who he didn't have much of a relationship with, but it's a beautiful song, and it got some airplay too. But Matt sent me this 12-inch single. Or it's not a 12-inch single, sorry. The package is 12-inch. It's a 7-inch single that's in a sleeve, but it's a huge poster from the UK. It's just really cool. But what else was on this? Disconnected, I think, was a single and a video. There is heavy stuff on here, like My Global Mind. I really like Damaged. That's a good heavy one. If you want to hear a good example of Jeff Tate's ability to just sing unaccompanied, the last track on here, Someone Else, which is just him and piano. There is a full band version of that song that eventually appeared on a best of. Once again, it was produced by Queensryche and Jimbo Barton. Jimbo was Peter Collins' engineer, so it has a similar but drier sound than Empire does. They would take that dry sound even further with their next album here, The Nell Frontier, which is one of my favorites. Actually, it wasn't successful. This album was successful. They went platinum, and they were still a big band on the road. So it's not one of my favorite Queensryche albums, but I've never had a problem with it. Of course, still showing the progressive roots with the title song, which is 8.5 minutes long, goes through all these different movements. I think it's the first time that Jeff Tate breaks out the saxophone, which he would do on many occasions. But yeah, good album. My number 8. Jack's number 7.
Number 7. Okay, so for my number 7, this is the first of 3 that I actually don't own a physical copy of. But I know that Tim does because you showed it off already. So if you would be so kind to hold up Tesla's Bust a Nut, my number 7. So yeah, this is album number 4, and it's a solid one. That Tim said a lot of stuff already, so I don't have much to say about it to add. But I was more familiar with the first 3 albums, but this one I enjoyed listening to it again. It had been a while. I'm like, yeah, this is it's a solid album. The opening track, The Gate / Invited, that's a nice heavy rocker with melodic elements. Really starts off the album beautifully, and there's many moods. I think this is like a theme in 1994 that we've addressed already a few times. Many moods, many themes going on, and it delivers a little something for fans of heavy, and it delivers something for fans of melodic, and I thought that was cool. Once again, like I addressed with the Spin Doctors, I find the album is a little on the long side at 14 tracks. And Tim addressed this before in another video, that around this time when CDs were getting popular, they realized, hey, we could fit like 80 minutes of music on this. So they were kind of taking advantage. It was more about quantity than it was of quality. So I think that's kind of evident, especially in this point in time. So a little bit of filler, but it's not enough to ruin the album. I still think it's a solid album. Let's see. Highlights are Solution, She Want, I thought was really cool. Mama's Fool, and Cry. Cry was a really nice song as well. So yeah, it's a solid Tesla album.
Yeah, the CD thing it's interesting because if you think about your favorite albums from the 70s and how classic and how every song is just if you're to put those, put them in your computer, I bet you'll find a lot of your favorite albums are between like 30 and 35 minutes long, if that.
Yeah.
But you don't think of them as being, you don't feel shortchanged listening to them because you like every bit of it. And then in the 80s, they tend to be 40, 45 minutes or 40 to 50 minutes long. So, and I think bands kind of fooled themselves into thinking, oh, well, we just have to come up with better songs that keep people's attention. Listen, guys, not everybody can put out Hysteria and have a 63-minute album where every song, my opinion, is fantastic. So, yeah, there was a little bit of a tendency to get into that. I think a lot of these albums could have been pared down to just really good, solid 10-song albums. And then years later, release a B-sides collection where people go, hey, this is pretty good. You're getting something that you never had before rather than like, all right, this is pretty good. Where are we? We're only on track 6. Oh, man.
Exactly.
All right, Matt's number 7.
All right, my number 7 is actually the 7th album from the band Great White. Tim's talked about this, showed us the cassette. This is the CD version of Sail Away. This came out in May of 1994. Now, somewhere in the early 90s, I actually stopped listening to Great White. It's not that I didn't like the band, but I had other stuff to listen to. I had to go back and find this one. It's actually obviously way out of print now. This was released on a small label called Zoo Entertainment. It's their only album to feature bassist Teddy Cook. It's a really chill acoustic album from the beginning. It's got your kind of bluesy fun songs like Mama Don't Stop, but the album starts out with it's called a short overture, and it's really kind of a little bit more emotional music than you used to from Great White. When it came out on CD, it said it was a special edition, came with Anaheim Live on a second CD. They never actually released any versions that don't have that second CD. So if you're looking for it, you're probably going to find it that way. It's way out of print and a little hard to find, as Tim has mentioned. But excuse me again. But yeah, my number 7 is Great White, Sail Away.
And Zoo Entertainment was, I believe, distributed by BMG. And now that if I think about it, probably the most popular artist that was on Zoo was Matthew Sweet. I seem to recall his albums were on Zoo. But yeah, good choice. John, your number 7.
All right, so now I'm going to go into a couple of albums I just would discover much later on that came out in '94. Now, this first one. This one is an album that was produced by the Elefante brothers. So Kansas fans, you'll recognize the Elefante name. Executive producer on this, Des Deckerson. You would probably know him from some early Prince albums. He was the guitar player. But anyway, this band called Bride, and it's an album called Scarecrow Messiah.
Nice.
So this album is probably, this was an era of this band called Bride, Christian heavy metal band. They started off as maybe more of a, I don't know, kind of a very heavy, maybe Iron Maiden, Judas Priesty kind of sound. Then they morphed a lot of blues into their sound, and they kind of did a lot of different other things that kind of melded together. But Dale had this very Axl Rose like voice, but yet he could get very almost grungy sounding at times. That had almost like a Lane Staley sound to it. Dale Thompson and the other guitar players that would come and go always brought in some really good riffs and grooves. This album in particular suffered from the grunge trope of one-word titles. So you have Beast, Place, Murder, Scarecrow, Crazy, Time, One, Doubt, Dad, Mom, Thorns, Questions. Those are the names of the tracks. But this is a very grooving, very Bride-like album. And Dale and Troy Thompson, the brothers, just soar on a lot of those songs. But this was probably the last of an era because they started experimenting more after this album. They were kind of more alternative sounding, a little lighter. They kind of went more different sound with another couple of albums, and they kind of did a hip hop metal sound, and then they were just all over the place. But still putting music out today. I think Dale's living in New Zealand these days, but they're still putting stuff out. So yeah, Bride, Scarecrow Messiah. There's probably another band that's probably a first on the on Tim's Vinyl Confessions.
Yeah, the one word, the one or maybe two word song titles. Yeah, that was very much a thing. Or you'd have like, and I'll pick on Pearl Jam, you'd have like, one word song title and then one with a really, really long title. Elderly woman behind the counter of, or whatever, right? Okay, cool. All right, so my number 7, Jex has already talked about. I didn't think anybody else would mention this album, so it was kind of neat. So 92, 93, I went back and got into a lot of 70s bands. That's when I discovered Queen and Kansas and Zeppelin and Purple. And so one band that I discovered with, really small catalog was Boston. And so, they only had 3 albums at that point, right? So my surprise in 94, again, being in the radio biz, like even in the college radio station, we'd still get sent all the sampler discs. So get sent this MCA sampler disc, and there's a song called I Need Your Love by Boston. I'm like, Boston have a new album? But then I got, yeah, well, it is 8 years. They're due, because it was 8 years from Don't Look Back to Third Stage. So yeah. And I thought it was a great melodic mid-tempo song. It's not heavy in the slightest, but it, I liked melodic rock. What can I tell you? I liked, poppy melodies and whatever. And I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't hearing it with new music. So to have a new song come out that fit into that was like, wow, this is cool. And like Jex, I didn't know it wasn't Brad Delp singing. I thought for sure it was Brad Delp. The first thing I got was a cassette single back when those things were out. It had We Could Make It as the B-side. And then the album eventually came out. And I bought it. Now, I would have told you it was absolutely fantastic when I first bought it. Now, this many years down the road, it's okay. I think most of Boston's albums after that first album are okay. I will say it's probably the last album I like pretty much all the way through, because the next 2 are just not that good. The Corporate America and the Life, Love and Hope and whatever that thing's called, not very good at all. But I think there's some good songs there. I do really like the Walk On medley. I do remember playing on the radio a really shortened version of the whole thing, because about 3 minutes long. I think What's Your Name is a catchy poppy song. But yeah, it came out. I was actually quite a long time before I realized that it actually had the title on it, because it's carved into the I didn't know that for a long time. Oh, that's cool. Would look really cool on vinyl. Yeah. Very expensive to find on vinyl. Even the CD itself looks pretty cool. So it's not something I reach for all the time, because that was lightning in a bottle with that debut Boston album, and all they were doing after that is chasing that that amount of greatness all at once. Oddly enough, Brad Delp does co-write some of the songs, but that may also be the fact that Tom Scholz sat on some of these songs for 5-6 years. I don't know, but something I didn't realize until very, very recently. I have yet to pick up the book. I've got to get it. But someone that almost, or was offered the job at joining Boston was Rick Emmett. And I did not know that. I had no idea that would have made sense, but I don't think it would have worked, because Rick Emmett's a songwriter, right? And Tom Scholz is the guy. He's the head honcho in Boston. So I don't know. That would not have worked. It might have worked for an album. But that is my number 7. It went platinum, probably just based on name recognition. It wasn't a sustained seller. I've never seen a reissue of it. I think all the copies are the copies that initially came out. I don't know, but anyway, on to Jex and his number 6.
Yeah. Well, one last thing about Walk On. You mentioned the vinyl copy that's very expensive. One thing I'm hesitant about that is it splits up the medley. You have to flip aside like midway into the medley. That's why there's a part of the medley that's called Get Organized. Well, on the vinyl, it's organized, and then it's get reorganized on the opposite side.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
Still wouldn't keep me from buying it if I came across it cheap.
right.
But you're right. You're right. That little section, that solo guitar section, and that is like, and it's such a meaty guitar tone too, and it's almost like Tom Scholz saying, "Hey, I can play guitar." Everybody knows I can write songs, but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, no, it's amazing. All right, so my number 6, released on August 2nd, 1994. Not for everyone, I would say. It's a bit of an odd band. I think they're great. I find them entertaining. Jackal.
Uh,
This is Push Comes to Shove. I love these guys. I know I just love them or hate them. I think they're great. Yeah, the whole chainsaw
yeah.
bit. I dig it. I dig it. It's different, and I think that's why I was into them. This is actually the first album I ever heard from them. I found this at a thrift store many years ago. I was like, "What's this? It looks interesting." I picked it up. I was like, "Hey, this is actually pretty good." The AC/DC, Aerosmith influences are very, very evident here.
Dripping.
What's that?
Dripping.
Yeah, yes. Well, even like you push play on this thing and the title track comes on, Push Comes to Shove. And I swear it's like the opening notes to it's an AC/DC song. It's a Long Way to the Top. If you want to rock and roll, like I'm like, oh my God. I got out of the gate. I'm like, is this AC/DC? But it's I love it. I love it still. What else can I say about it? It gets a lot of criticism for Jesse James Dupree's vocal delivery. You know, I get it's not for everyone, but I mean, if you look at it for what it is, which is just like have fun, good time, rock and roll, I think it's fine. I think it's fine, you know, but I get that it's not for everyone. It was produced by Bruce Fairbairn, which I didn't realize till just recently. I'm like, who produced this?
It doesn't sound like a Bruce Fairbairn production either.
It does not. It does not. It took me by surprise. So good time rock and roll album. Highlights for me are Headed for Destruction, Dixieland, I Want It, and I Am the I Am. I dig it. And before I pass it to the next person I want to show off, I actually found the CD single for the title track, Push Comes to Shove. And what made me buy this one is the 2 bonus tracks on here are live versions of songs from the first album, When Will It Rain and Dirty Little Mind. So nice little add-on.
That was another band that they were on Geffen, and I think that both of those first 2 albums sold really well considering the climate.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, those first 2 albums were pretty successful.
Boy, when will it rain was like I remember hearing that on the radio quite a bit, and it was it didn't have enough of that raunch that most of the rest of the album had, so it could still be very radio friendly.
Yeah.
But yeah, then forget about it with the lumberjack.
Yeah.
All right, Matt's number 6.
Now, I'm not doing this on purpose, but I just realized that my number 6 is the 6th studio album from this band. It's their first with their new lead singer, John Corabi. And this is 1994 album, self-titled. This is I think there was 2 versions of this released on CD. Now, contrary to popular belief, they released the yellow cover version. This was in yellow, or red version. So both of those versions were produced at the same time. You just never kind of knew which one you were going to get until you store. Now, any re-release of this has the red cover, so I guess technically this would be the more collectible version to find. But so I have a few anecdotes about some of these albums, and I wanted to mention. So in March of 1994 was my first trip to the UK. I was going to school for journalism. They sent us for 2 weeks to the UK to cover some events for. It was called the Accommodations, Food and Beverage class, from basically all these people learning how to do fancy food and service and some of the most expensive hotels and motels in UK. Anyway, where I'm going with this, on our trip, we did on March 15th, we did a southerly trip from London down to Portsmouth, which I think is by the water. And I picked up this album. I didn't realize it was actually the release day, and I wasn't even buying it for myself. I bought a vinyl copy of this which I don't have because I brought it home and gave it to Tim and I, one of our best friends at the time, Bobby Stevens. I bought him the vinyl version of this album. I wish I'd bought my own copy. I wasn't sure if it
Yeah.
was a good album or not, so I kind of waited for someone else to tell me what it was going to sound like. But yeah, Motley Crue. I think Tim, you might have mentioned this as one of your favorite, not your favorite Motley Crue album.
More to come. More to come.
I did want to read one quick little passage from. So of course I had to buy The Dirt when it came out, and just to sum up exactly John Crabtree's kind of feelings about this time, I wanted to read a quick little thing here from The Dirt. Just give me a minute here.
I think I know what he's going to read.
Yeah, this is the chapter, page 256. John Crabtree's in the band. Steven Tyler told me I was the guy in a circus who was about to be shot out of a cannon. And that's what it felt like. I put on my crash helmet, tied my superhero cape around my neck, climbed into the barrel, and waited while the three ringmasters ran around behind me and lit the fuse. It was the happiest moment of my life. But when I landed, of course, we know that he only stayed with the band for one. But when I landed, it hurt like no other pain I'd ever experienced. So that was John Crabtree's life in a nutshell with Motley Crue. I do really love this album. Again, I mentioned this on the Nine Inch Nails album. It's got like a heavier industrial sound, but I really like the groove on songs like Hooligan's Holiday. Excuse me, the opener, Power to the Music. Love Shine's a really beautiful acoustic song. There's some really heavy riffs on here for Motley Crue. But that's my number 6, Motley Crue's self-titled album.
Good stuff.
Cool. All right, John.
All right, my number 6. So this is another album that again I would discover a few years later. This is an album that is produced by Jim, I believe it's pronounced Faraci, Faraci, who he was known for. Let's see, one album that comes to my mind was Lizzie Borden's Menace to Society album. This is another Christian band, Tourniquet, Vanishing Lessons, first album to feature new lead singer Luke Easter. Very groovy, still has some of the thrash elements of their previous albums. Ted Kirkpatrick, rest in peace. He passed away about a year or two ago. He does a drum bit to a harpsichord piece by composer Domenico Scarlatti, and so he does that. That's kind of a cool thing for him. Again, Luke Easter's voice, kind of a growly, singy voice, but pretty powerful for the lyrics, given the lyrics he's given here. Bearing Gruesome Cargo, great track. Title track, Vanishing Lessons, another great track. Drowning Machine, Push and Broom. K517 is the track I mentioned a minute ago about the harpsichord piece. It's just Tourniquet is just one of those legendary bands in the Christian hard thrashy metal sound. Ted was always known for a lot of like allegorical kind of ideas with his lyrics, but yet he always tied it into biblical themes in some way, shape, or form. It was really out there. You really had to get deep into it, but not to get all preachy or whatever. But he was a very interesting writer, of monster drummer. But yeah, passed away a couple of years ago. And yeah, there you go. And then this was a reissue they did recently with some kind of upgraded artwork, I believe was done. This may have been touched up by Scott Waters from No Life Till Metal. I believe this may have been some of his work. I don't recall that.
That's cool. I know Scott. Yeah.
Yep. So there you go. That would be my number 6, and probably another band again, maybe not mentioned on Tim's Vinyl Confessions.
One thing I know about Tourniquet is that they did somewhere they did a version of song I love, Fleetwood Mac's "Oh Well." I don't know what album it was on, but yeah.
I can't remember either. Yeah.
So my number 6 is an album that Matt's already mentioned, and a band that still did well into the grunge era, although they're kind of one of those bands, they've been, around so long, they were kind of above all of that, the trends. but it's ZZ Top Antenna. I really like this album. I never really got into ZZ Top until, like, I don't know, turn of the 2000s. I mean, I'd always been aware of them, but I'd never had any of their albums. I think I needed something on Columbia House, so I bought like the greatest hits, and then I got that six pack, the infamous six pack, and discovered the 70s stuff, which I really didn't know much about. But this album, I've been on the contrarian saying that Recycler was my least favorite ZZ Top album. I just don't think it was very good at all. This is a big step up, yet it still has a little tiny bit of the electronic sound, especially in the drum department. They would very soon get out of that with the next album, Rhythm, which is fantastic. But as far as Antenna goes, this was their first album on RCA, so they're not on Warner Brothers anymore. It's the only one of those RCA albums that went platinum that did much at all. Pincushion's a great song. The video got a lot of play. They're continually moving back and forth. You know, Antenna Head is a great song. Lizard Light. This is a great album. I mean, it's ZZ Top. You know, you don't need to put it on. Gee, I wonder who this is. I mean, it's instantly identifiable. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to pick highlights. I can just put this album on and just really enjoy it. Not much else to say. Just a really good ZZ Top album, my number 6. Okay, so with that, I believe we're in the top 5 now. So the heavy hitters begin with Jeffs.
All right, top 5, gentlemen. This is the second one that I don't have a physical copy of. Not an easy one to find, but Matt has shown it off already. So if you would be so kind, Matt, to lift your copy of Motley Crue, self-titled. Yeah, that's an album that I haven't heard nearly enough. Because oftentimes I'll listen to albums I have, and that's one I don't have. But I was listening to it in preparation, and what a fantastic album! I love it. Again, I think it's either you love it or hate it album for fans, because there's fans that are like, it doesn't sound like Motley Crue, you know. But for me, that's the good part of it. That's what I like about it. It's not your, you know, typical Motley Crue album. It's different. It's outside of the box. And I dig that. I love John Corabi as a frontman, as a vocalist. His voice is amazing. I wish we could have gotten at least one more album from this lineup. That would have been great, but I can't imagine the Motley Crue guys being an easy bunch to get along with. So I get it. I get it why it didn't work out. It's all good. They gave us one fantastic album, and I'm all right with that. The production is by Bob Rock, and I think the production here is absolutely excellent, which that's a big thing for me to say. I think I've gone on record many times that I haven't cared for Bob Rock's production in the past. You know, oftentimes I thought he would bring in horn sections that I just didn't understand. It didn't make sense to me. But here I will give him praise. The production he did for this album is absolutely incredible. It sounds, the guitars are just so crunchy. It's just like a heavy sound. It's fantastic. Hard to pick highlights or favorites from this one for me. Like I said, I haven't heard it all that much, but every time I listen to it, it's great. I say play it and enjoy the ride. It's don't expect Motley Crue of old. It's a whole different animal, but it's fantastic. So my number 5, Motley Crue.
All right, so Matt's number 5.
We are just about halfway there, guys. I just wanted to say, I think we're in for a pretty epic long 2-hour TVC video here. So my 5 is the 13th solo album by Alice Cooper, came out on July 12th. I wanted to show this spread here. So this is Alice Cooper's The Last Temptation. And this was a time when we had, you know, CDs would come out with booklets that you could unfold and keep unfolding, and they turn into posters. So here's like all the lyrics, and on the sort of front panel, you've got a colorized version of some cartoon paint. So they actually wrote a story to this album. Al wrote it with a famous art writer at the time, Neil Gaiman. He was known for writing The Sandman. I think one of our kids actually mentioned reading a recent Neil Gaiman story. I think he's still writing to this day, but I was really when they put this out. Dark Horse Comics put out this little graphic novel, black and white version of the entire story of the Last Temptation. So it's kind of follows along the lines of like the Circus of the Damned or whatever, someone stumbling into this circus, and the that kind of happens with the sinister showman. And anyway, I really like this album. It does feature one song by Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. He really does his lower register and his higher register in that song. I won't go on too much more about this, but yeah, my number 5, Alice Cooper's The Last Temptation.
Yeah, that was kind of like Alice's, almost like his coming out party as a born again Christian, I believe.
Is that right?
I believe that was the kind of the gateway to that, because he was starting to talk a lot more about his faith, I think, at that point. So I think that was kind of a backdoor coming out party for him for that. So
Definitely more on that album later.
Right.
Okay, John, you're number
all
5.
right. Well, I'm sure your viewers are probably going to be sick of me talking about Christian metal bands, but this is another one that I am a big, huge fan of. I would discover this band again about 1998. By that point, life had changed a lot for me. So I was getting into a lot of these kind of Christian bands. So this reissue that I'm about to show, this came out about 2017. This is an Australian metal band called Mortification, and an album called Blood World. Jex is shaking his head, so you must know who this is.
I know of them. They are heavy. They're heavy
Yes.
even for me.
Yes, these guys were known to do. They do a little bit of thrash, death, grind, core, groove, power, straight up heavy metal, garage metal, but all of it was, as Steve Rowe, the bassist and main lyricist, would like to call it, Jesus metal, and that's basically what all the Mortification albums are like. But this one, Mortification classics. Love Song, Your Life would probably be some of the more well-known songs that they don't play in concert, because Steve Rowe would about 2 years after this album came out originally, had a really severe life and death encounter with leukemia and cancer, and there was times he almost didn't make it. He managed to make it through. He's had a long, hard road since then. He has since retired from performing because basically his health just can't do it anymore. And but there's a record label based out of Australia that is reissuing stuff. Make sure he gets the royalties for it, because he was always a big proponent against stealing albums and illegal downloads. It's like, please buy our albums, please. That's what helps. That's what supports the band. He's been doing that. He preached that for long before the labels became almost insignificant. And the only time bands could make money was if they sold hard copies or merch or whatever it was. But Blood World, another wonderful album.
So my number 5, John will probably not be surprised that this is getting mentioned. Jex has already mentioned it. We had the pleasure of doing an intense deep dive series on Grant's Rock Warehouse on one of my favorite Canadian bands. We just lost the leader of the band at the end of last year, Miles Goodwin. So this is April Wine's 1994 album, Frigate. It came out in the summer of 94, and chronologically, the way it worked, this was actually the first April Wine album that I was waiting for as a fan. And I remember being quite surprised that a new April Wine album was coming out so soon, because it had barely been a year since the Attitude album came out. And that was a great heavy return to form for them. It went gold in Canada. This album, unfortunately, did not do nearly as well. You can just kind of tell from the packaging that the record label they were on, FRE, kind of fell apart and kind of disappeared into nothingness. And a good, when you see what does that say, Factor, this next to the barcode, that means that they had funding, government funding to do the album. But I think it's quite a good album. I don't think it's quite as good as Attitude, but I think that Miles Goodwin could always be counted on for good melodic songs. Driving with My Eyes Closed has always been one of my favorites. Reinforced when I saw them live that year on that tour. That got the house going for a new song. Great ballads, as always. If I Was a Stranger, Whatever It Takes, Hard to Believe. You can always come up with great ballads. Two really cool covers that are quite different from the originals. They do I Just Want to Make Love to You, which is, Willie Dixon's song, is best known for Foghat's version. They do a version of Spencer Davis, I'm a Man. Chicago also did an early version of that, but they changed it a little bit. They always did, good covers. The opener, Look Into the Sun, really heavy for them, surprisingly heavy. And on this album is they re-recorded one of their classic tracks from the 70s, Tonight Is a Wonderful Time to Fall in Love, but they made it more of a ballad, because at that time in concert, they started doing it that way. They eventually went back to doing it the previous way. But the only thing I never really liked in this album is the closer, Mind Over Matter. I don't understand why that song exists. It's just really this really weird pop thing that Miles tried out, but a decent album. Don't know how easy it is to find now. And that's my number 5 is Rig It by April Wine.
I was lucky to find this in the wild at my local store for $3.
And that blows my mind, because that album never even came out like outside of Canada. So somebody
I lucked out with this one.
Yeah.
All
Cool.
right.
All right, Jax.
My number 4. All right. So this was released on August 23rd, 1994, the same day as Tesla's Bust a Nut, although a very different album. This is a band called Toadies with their debut Rubberneck. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with Toadies.
I've seen that album cover, and I don't know if my sister had that album or what, but it looks very familiar.
Okay, could be, yeah. I discovered them as early 2004, which is hard to believe that's 20 years ago now. I had just rewatched Ben Stiller's film, The Cable Guy, which features a song by Toadies on the soundtrack called Unattractive. So at the time, I was still downloading music, not proud of it, but I got over that. So I started just downloading Toadies songs. I'm like, these guys are really good. And then it wasn't until many years later, 2012, I came across a copy of their CD. I was like, oh wow. And I haven't seen it since. So it's not a common one. It's not a common one at all. But I think it's great. This is straight up, it's alternative rock. I wouldn't call it grunge by any stretch, but it's alternative. It's heavy. It's catchy. The song Backslider can be heard in the 1996 comedy Black Sheep with Chris Farley and David Spade. Possum Kingdom, you can hear that one in a very highly successful TV drama, This Is Us, in recent years. Possum Kingdom was in season 1, episode 17, which I watched it with my wife, and I remember I was like, hey, that's Toadies. So they're popular enough to have been included in popular culture. They had their songs in movies, TV shows. So they were, as much as people don't seem to know about them, they made a dent, because they're included. If I have to recommend one song off of this, I say check out Tyler. I remember coming across that song, and it's so good. It's one of those songs, every time I'd have it on in the car, if I had someone with me, they'd be like, hey, what is this? Who is this? Like, it's one of those songs that just makes people like jam out. So yeah, check out Tyler from Rubberneck by Toadies.
Now, if I'd never seen that CD, I would have thought that when someone talked about the band Toadies, that was just a nickname for Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Oh,
So, pretty obscure, but I've seen that album cover before, and I'm not sure where. All right, Max, number 4.
All right, my number 4 is came out pretty early in the year. I remember this being a really popular album. So we just come back from Christmas vacation in college, and now we're back into the grind again. And on January 25th, Alice in Chains put out Jar of Flies. Now, I know this is an EP, it's not a full studio album, but I kind of considered it a full studio album, because you could get a version of this that also came with the Sap EP. Now this album, so it's about 30 minutes long, and it was the first one they recorded with Mike Inez, who joined them on bass. Mike had previously worked with Ozzy Osbourne. He did some stuff on the No More Tears album. A lot of these songs became really popular later on when Alice in Chains were on the MTV Unplugged series. I bought this DVD. Songs like Nutshell, No Excuses. So this is like a really kind of chill acoustic album. I think actually, if you were to ask me, Matt, what's your favorite quote unquote grunge era album? This might be it, Alice in Chains. I did happen to, on that trip to the UK, I did buy something for myself. this is an original vinyl pressing of, excuse me, Jar of Flies. And it came with the SAP EP as the vinyl, but
The
something
SAP
that-
EP is amazing as well.
yeah, got some really funky kind of colored vinyl. So, 1994. Somehow I managed to get this in my suitcase and Heathrow Airport all the way back here to Canada, and not a scratch. It's not bent. So that's pretty.
Amazing.
And it should be mentioned, like for people that don't know, I mean, in the UK, new albums still came out on vinyl as a
Yeah.
regular. There was nothing special about it. They just kept making vinyl, I think, most of the 90s.
Yes,
So
exactly.
over here, it was a big deal to see new albums on vinyl. Yeah, I remember working in radio. No Excuses got a ton of
Big time.
airplay. Yeah, yeah, and really, like I said before, that's as long as a lot of classic 70s albums are. So as albums got longer, the definition of an EP got longer as well. Cool. All right, John's number 4.
All right. I want to allude to this thing again. Scott Waters did not do this one. This was done by Rex Zachary was the cover artist for this one. So I wanted to give credit where credit was due. But okay, number 4. So so now I'm going to go back to something more familiar that everybody will know and love. But 1994 was a little bit of a dormant year, kind of, sort of, for this band. They weren't putting out any new material, but boy, there was a lot of buzz around them with just different things that were going on. It was about the 20th anniversary of their first album, which means this year is their 50th anniversary of their first album. And, it was a time that everybody and their brother started coming out with tribute albums.
Oh,
And this was no exception.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I was a huge Kiss fan. Loved them since 75, I think, was when I first picked up. I begged my dad to get Dressed to Kill, and I just thought that was the coolest. And I think I got it before Alive had come out. So that's how far back I had gone with Kiss. But yeah, so you get a funky version of Deuce with Lenny Kravitz and Stevie Wonder on harmonica at that. You get Garth Brooks doing basically a very faithful version of Hard Luck Woman. He really wanted to do God of Thunder, but yeah. Anthrax doing a heavy version of She. You get the Gin Blossoms doing Christine 16, which I'm like, why? Let's see. Toad the Wet Sprocket doing Rock and Roll All Night. Yeah, you get a super group of with Shandy's Addiction, I think, that had like Tom Morello and a couple of other people doing Calling Dr. Love, Dinosaur Jr. doing Going Blind, Extreme doing Strutter, mixing God of Thunder in there, Lemonheads, who just were on every tribute album you could find, I think, back then, doing Plaster Caster, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones doing Detroit Rock City, and to me, the ending track on this, which to me is the best version I think I have ever heard of a Kiss song, Yoshiki doing Black Diamond.
so
Absolutely brings tears to my eyes when I listen to that. It is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
being the last track in the album on that album, John, depends on where you get it, because
Exactly, yes.
that's one of those albums I remember being surprised to find it on vinyl domestically. They actually put it out domestically on red vinyl.
Yep.
And it had a bonus track, which was this German band called Die Ärzte, probably not pronouncing that right, doing a really heavy version of a then current Kiss song,
Unholy.
Unheilig.
Yeah.
In German.
Unheilig. Yeah, I remember I had that. I had that vinyl
Bex,
version.
have you heard that?
I haven't heard that. No.
You
Yeah.
gotta check it. You'd
Yeah, you
love
gotta
it.
check it out.
In the middle of it, they bust in "I Was Made for Loving You." Makes no sense, but
yeah.
but
It's very industrial sounding band,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's true. That was on the vinyl version, but the CD version ends with Yoshiki. But yeah, I being the Kiss fan I was grooving on this a lot. So there you go.
so this is fun, because this is around the time I was really just getting into Kiss, thanks in no small part to Matt. And this was the first thing that came out after, kind of taking that dive. And I didn't include it. I'm hot and cold on a lot of the songs. I love the concept, and I like the fact that people were talking about them at the time. really only like some of the songs on it. I mean, I think,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm not a country music fan at all. I love Garth's version of Hard Luck Woman. It's so good. It's
Yeah.
so faithful. And it's actually, by the way, folks, that's Kiss. That's his backing band on that. You
Mhm.
can hear Paul Stanley's backing vocals plain as day. And I remember hearing that in the mall and thinking that's really cool. It didn't chart very well. It got a lot of airplay, but the reason it didn't chart very well, I found out later, was because it wasn't on his label. So his label wasn't going to allow Mercury to put much. Because if they'd have done a video for that, Garth was the biggest music star in the world at that time. Might have
Mhm.
done a lot for, Kiss's profile, but love Anthrax's version of She. It's the Alive version. So they mix down, da-na-na, they throw that in at the
Yep.
end. I mean, I love Extreme. Yeah, their version of Strutter's fun. Gary Sharon does a really good Paul Stanley impression. Whoa! Like, and
Mhm.
I do like the fact they go into God of Thunder in the middle of it if you're listening really close. And yeah, I like the concept more than I like the album because it is pretty alternative, and that's just not
Oh,
my
yeah.
thing. But it's fun and it definitely it was definitely noteworthy. It got them a lot of press. So
Mhm.
because I've always joked about that, I got into Kiss at the most unlikely time to get into Kiss because it just wasn't cool, right? Although I am glad I got into them before they reunited, so I certainly can't be accused of bandwagon jumping.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, Matt's right. This is a long one, so if you've stuck in this far, we salute you. Okay, so number 4, as I mentioned, not a big fan of what was popular in rock music at the time, and one of the bands I discovered that was delivering melodic rock and with some serious chops was an album that Jex has mentioned, Dream Theater. So this was their third album, Awake, second one with James LaBrie. This came out in the fall of '94. This isn't one of my favorite Dream Theater albums, but for albums from 1994, I certainly did like it a lot. I didn't get into this band for a couple years after this came out, but I always liked the song Lie, which was the first single off of this. Super heavy. I mean, they're doing the drop, they're doing the 7-string drop thing, but they're not like context, just like really heavy riffs. And this was the last album the keyboard player Kevin Moore was on, and he would like disappear for years after that. And it's got the very last song on this album is a song of his called Space Divest. And it's I'm still to this day, I'm not sure what it's about exactly, but it's very sad and it's very like piano based. And I don't even know if you'd call it a ballad, but apparently the band has said if they'd known he was leaving, they wouldn't have put the song on there. So it's a real melancholy vibe on it, but it's got super heavy stuff like the opener, 6 o'clock, Voices. Well, no, Voices is like a slower one, but the mirror is the first time that they used just that just that one note riff, but they changed the pattern on it. Yeah, it's good stuff. My number 4.
All right.
Jack's number 3.
You know what? Well, number 3. So Tim has said on a few occasions that I bring the heavy stuff here, which I noticed John.
I don't know. Like John's
John is as well, which
I
I like that. So I'm not alone anymore. But so I figured I shouldn't disappoint. I should bring some heavy stuff. But looking at that list of 1994, I'm like, man, metal was it? Is it scarce? Is that how you say the word? It's like few and far between. It's
yeah, grunge just didn't affect hair metal. It affected everything.
All metal, yeah. Like Megadeth had an album, like Matt showed. I think Slayer had an album in '94 too. But overall, it's like I said, this was a different list from the other years we've covered. So that having been said, I got a great one here that hails from Ottawa, Ontario, and it is the 4th album from Canadian thrashers Annihilator, called King of the Kill. And I had this kind of on standby. I was like, it's probably going to be an honorable mention. I don't really remember how good the album is. Well, I listened to it yesterday, and as you can see, it just kept just surpassing like It surpassed Tesla. It surpassed Jackal. I was like, this is good. Like it surprised me because at this point, I mean, if you look at the back, it's basically a Jeff Waters solo project. He's there by himself because he played, he did vocal duties. He played guitar and bass, and on drums was a man called Randy Black, which I find it kind of funny. You just see Jeff here, but that being said, the album it kills, man. It shreds. It's so good, and it's got variety. It's not just thrash metal all the way through. You got some melodic songs that really caught me off guard, and I really loved the flow of the album. It was absolutely terrific. So yeah, that's why it jumped up to my number 2. I couldn't believe it. So yeah, what can I say? I have some highlights here. The highlights are, well, the whole album, really. Like, check out the whole album. But I do recommend checking out the title track, King of the Kill, as well as the beautifully melodic Catch the Wind. It did not sound like Annihilator, but I'm just glad that they were experimenting and just trying other sounds that weren't straight up thrash. And
that's not a cover, is it?
Catch the Wind? Oh, could it? I don't know. Not
Just
to my
wondering.
knowledge. Who?
Don't know. You're the one with the CD and the credits, man, not me.
Yeah, no. Okay, I'll have to get back to you on that.
When you said it was different, I know that there's a Donovan song called Catch the Wind. It might not be. Sammy Hagar recorded it too, but that was just the first thing I thought of when you said it was different.
Yeah, it's different from the rest.
Poor
of
Jax, I put him on the spot all the time.
Hey, no, but that's good. I'm gonna definitely look into that.
But I know that Jax will get on it like a bloodhound because he looks into things.
I look into things. Yeah, I research. But yeah, check out. Lastly, the last thing I want to mention, the song "Speed," which very much gave me the Van Halen "Hot for Teacher" vibes, like a lot of like Alex Van Halen type of, and even the guitar. So yeah, pleasantly surprised. Like, I hadn't listened to it in a while. I forgot how good this is. King of the Kill, Annihilator.
Jax was going to say, yeah, that song was initially considered for the movie Speed, which came out the same year.
The same year. It could have been.
But they settled on Billy Idol. All right, cool.
According to Wikipedia, Jeff Waters pretty much writes every track on that album. There's no covers.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So
I
just
didn't
look that
think
up
so,
for you.
but weirder things have happened. So, all right, Matt.
All of these top 3 are actually 3 of my, again, 100 favorite albums of all time. I'm really excited to talk about these 3. So my number 3 is the second studio album from Tom Petty. Came out in November of that year. It's Tom Petty's Wildflower. Initially, this was going to be a double album. He was working with, first time he was working with Rick Rubin. He had Mike Campbell and he had Benmont Tench on this album, but to get away from that kind of and the Heartbreaker sound, that there's a new bassist. They had different people playing bass and different people playing drums, and that kind of gave it a different sound. Now, I'm not a master guitarist, but I was kind of teaching people how to play basic acoustic guitar at the time. And Tom Petty's Free Fallin' is always a song that I like to teach students. So I was coming, the only thing I'd actually owned from Tom Petty at that time was that Greatest Hits album that had Last Dance with Mary Jane and of course all his big hits. So I wouldn't really consider myself like to be a Tom Petty aficionado, but I just moved away. I literally hopped on a train and moved 16 hours away from my hometown to Ontario. And this came out in November, just like a month or so after I moved there. And I was just, walking downtown in this new city I was trying to get to know, and I saw this album came out and just said, heck, I'll pick it up. I like Tom Petty. I've got that Greatest Hits. This has turned out to be actually one of my favorite albums of all time. It starts out with really kind of plaintive Wildflowers. He released a video to the song, You Don't Know How It Feels. It kind of got a lot of the videos that around this kind of era I found had like a weird kind of circus theme going on in the background. I'm not sure why that is for 1994, but there's 15 songs on here and I love every single one. And it could have been an actual double album. They recorded at least 30 songs. Not too long ago, they did a kind of a re-release of this album for the 30th anniversary, Wildflowers and All the Rest. It's like a big box set. I haven't been able to find that yet at a price that I can afford, but I did find this Finding Finding Wildflowers alternate version. So these are kind of the versions of the songs that they recorded that sound like Tom Petty, that sound like his previous album, Full Moon Fever, which was like his first solo album. But Tom wanted to make a statement with Wildflowers. He wanted to be a Tom Petty solo album, not a Heartbreakers album. I think, excuse me, Rick Rubin really helped him accomplish that on Wildflowers. So that's my number 3.
I knew that one would be mentioned for that reason. You'd mentioned that album meant a lot to you when you first moved away. I had a brief move in early '95, but I don't want to talk about that. John, over to you. You're number
All right.
3.
All right. So my number 3 is going to be brought to you by the Brothers Gallagher. No, not the Oasis Brothers Gallagher.
Oh, I know. I know what you
I'm
mean.
talking about John and Mark Gallagher of the band Raven. Now, in 1991, this came out, and this was the last album I had gotten from Raven. So after this came out, they kind of just fell off my radar altogether, for whatever reason. I would come to find out, yeah, some of these bands got relegated to some really tiny little labels. Some of them where you were lucky to even find any of these albums from. So about 10 years ago, I started getting back into Raven thanks to a Kickstarter program they did for their album Extermination. And I really started just getting intense back into Raven because I loved them back in the 80s. Just adored them. Live in the Inferno is probably one of my favorite live albums easily. And so I would eventually come to find out that they would release an album in March of '94 called Glow. Now, this is a reissue that just came out on vinyl a few years ago from a company called Night of the Vinyl Dead. So
Yes.
So they have a few other ones out there, hard to track down, but even on CD, this was hard to find. And I eventually found like a bootleg European version somewhere, but it gave me enough of a taste. I'm like, okay, so this is John and Mark and kind of experimenting with a little bit of that grungy sound, but still unquestionably Raven. You know, songs like Watch You Drown, a great lead off track. True Believer, great track. They do Thin Lizzy's The Rocker on this as well. Give Me a Reason, Slip Away. There's some really atypically very heavy Raven tracks still on this, but they still feel like they have that grungy, groovy kind of metal that was coming out about that time. But yeah, this is a really solid album. I managed to get a hold of this through John himself. He said, "Hey, I have some copies. First come, first serve. Message me for details." And it is signed by Mark and John. So thank you, John and Mark. It was I love going through getting the Raven catalog on vinyl. It's just been they have really have reconnected a love for me with them. So yeah, there you go. Raven Glow, a very, very hard to find album. And if you can track it down, get it. I don't think it's on streaming services, so you really are going to struggle for that, but it's still a great album. So so now over to Tim as he's wrestling here.
Guys, I'm sorry. Rufus is trying to tell me it's lunchtime, but he can hang on for a few other minutes. Ow! Yeah, Night of the Vinyl Dead. Really like what they've done with a lot of lesser known albums from bigger bands from the 90s and early 2000s. I've got That's How I Got Y&T, Face Melter, Endangered Species, Musically Incorrect. Those had never been released on vinyl.
Mhm.
Night Ranger 7, I think, is the other one I've got on that label. And, sometimes like the Night Ranger 7 one, I don't know if you've noticed this with any of yours, but I don't think they have access because they were never on vinyl. I think sometimes all they did was like blow up the CD cover because that Night Ranger one's really blurry looking, but it's better than not having it. And what I like about what they do, there's a few things I like about what they do, is that they make the labels on the records themselves look like other like the labels that these bands were on at one time, but just changed the lettering. For
Right.
example, Y&T Face Melter, the label of it looks like it could have been on London Records in the 70s. So I kind of like that. And I also like the fact that if there's bonus tracks, they'll include the bonus tracks. So
Yeah,
there
this
you go.
one didn't. The only thing I will say is I don't know. It doesn't have a loud vinyl sound. When I listen to this on vinyl, it just does it's not. It's kind of a lo-fi sound almost, and I don't know if that's maybe the kind of vinyl it was produced on, but anyway, it's not.
Could be the master tapes too. Like
Could be the master tapes.
because
That's
yeah, and a
possible.
lot of these albums were recorded for really small labels or labels that went defunct. And yeah, no, it's what they do is a good thing. And I like
Yeah.
the fact that you order them and you know what number you've got. Like you've got 330 out of 500 or something like that. Good, that's cool. Stuff like that's right up my alley. That whole record lengths and stuff. My number 3 is one that Matt's already mentioned, and this is an artist that Matt got me into like many years later. I just never paid much attention, and I was missing out. So it wasn't really until the year 2000 that I got into Alice Cooper. So my number 3 is The Last Temptation, and this is a fantastic album that just didn't do anything. Sadly, a lot of Alice's albums just don't get the attention. Like his albums that sold, like if his line of his discography is like a big long line, the albums that did really well for him go broop, 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 some of the very beginning, and then broop, that one Up for Air with Trash. But other than that, but to his credit, he just keeps punching away, and it doesn't matter how small the labels are, he just keeps putting the music out. But Last Temptation is the last of the 3 albums he would do for Epic, Sony, and it's really, really good. Does not sound like it came out in 1994 at all. It's very, very just good rock productions. Bruce, there's a bunch of producers on this one. Produced by Andy Wallace, produced by Don Fleming. Yeah, my eyes are bad. Dwayne Barron and John Purdell. You've seen their names on a bunch of things, but very stripped back production wise. Like it's like Hey Stupid was a little stripped back from Trash. This is stripped back further still, but it's not grunge, even though Chris Cornell, I think he's on Stolen Prayer, and I think he's on Unholy War, but I could be wrong about that. But that's Alice's only nod to the grunge era, because I mean, these guys that have been around since the late 60s, what do they need to, Alice has always been interested in music that was popular. You need only go back and listen to Flush the Passion from 1980, which I love. But anyway, so the singles off of this, the first single, video, really fun rocker, Lost in America. I remember Matt playing me this song. I think he had recorded the video on the VHS tape, and I remember thinking the lyrics were kind of funny. Like Alice has described the lyrics of that song as like a dog, oddly enough, a dog chasing his tail, because he comes back around to the same problem. But I love the end part where he's like, in a house with cable, in that deadpan.
Yeah.
One thing I find is interesting on here, the song You're My Temptation, great, heavy, sort of seductive sounding rocker. It's co-written by Jack Blades and Tommy Shaw, who were in Damn Yankees at the time, and they were starting to become known as a songwriting team because they did that with Aerosmith and Ozzy and a bunch of different people. But this song, musically, 2 years later, Metallica would put out The House That Jack Built. Open my eyes. I have to wonder. It's pretty close. Anyway, it's a good album. Alice doing his concept album thing. I like the fact that 94, this is the last album he would do for 6 years. It's got the song Nothing's Free. Now, 6 years later on Brutal Planet, he goes, I really hate to repeat myself, but nothing's free. Yeah, Sank Without a Trace. Would love to have it on vinyl, like a good reproduction of this on vinyl. I think it exists, but it's expensive. Great album. Like a lot of Alice albums, doesn't get enough attention. So that's my number 3. All right, Jackson. Numero 2.
Number 2. So thinking back, I think I need to correct myself. I think when I was talking about Annihilator, I may have said it was my number 2 by mistake. I forgot where we were. My actual number 2 is the last one I don't own a physical copy of, and that is album number 5 for King's X, Dogman, which much like Motley Crue came in various colors for the cover. This one had 4 because the cover is just it's a dog with its head tilted.
It's like a
And
negative, isn't it? Like a
Yeah,
camera
yeah.
photo negative.
Yeah, very much so. And I think you can get it in yellow, green, blue, and red, I think, with the 4 colors.
Collect them all.
Yeah, exactly.
Groups like Dogman. Sounds like my kind of album.
So, of course, as with most hard rock or metal bands in the mid-90s,
As you were.
poor Tim. There's an aggression here that I don't feel was present in the earlier 4 albums, but they're able to bring that element and not lose themselves or their sound. It still sounds like King's X. You know, you have Doug Pinnick's unmistakable voice, not to mention the harmonies between him and Ty Tabor. And the aggression doesn't affect that. It still sounds like King's X, but they do something different. And for me, it works. You know, it adds, that aggression just adds to it. Highlights for me here are the title track, Dogman, Black the Sky, Complain, and I do enjoy their cover of Jimi Hendrix's Manic Depression, which closes off the album. I thought that was a nice touch. So yeah, that's my number 2, Dogman, my actual number 2.
To be honest, I didn't even notice, but I'm a little distracted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Matt. You're number 2. I know what one of them is going to be, but I can't what the other one is.
Okay. My number 2. So again, I'd moved away. This was the fall of '94. This is pretty early in the fall, October 10th. And the 6th album from The Cult. It's another self-titled album from 1994. At this time, I was really looking for kind of a comfort album, and this was not it. Originally, I didn't like this album at all. This is not the Cult of the Sonic Temple and Ceremony and Love and Electric. This is called Racing, the music of the time, a little more alternative. There's not a lot of Billy Duffy on this record. But it took me a long time to warm up to this record. I mentioned it is on favorite albums of all time now. This is the Cult working again with Bob Rock. Now they did do Sonic Temple with Bob Rock, took a break from that, and he's back in the fourth year. And they've got a whole new band. So it's Ian Astbury and Billy Duffy, or the core of the Cult. And then they've got a new bassist, Craig Adams, on drums. And I just watched a live video of them not too long ago, and there was like a 5th kind of touring guitarist member. So this is the Cult 5-piece with the core of Ian and Billy. I've got quite a few of the CD singles. Tim gave me this one not too long ago. It's one of those, I think you bought it with a case of genuine Miller Draft.
Oh yeah.
CD single for the song Be Free. Yeah, it's the song Be Free. I have the CD single for the song Coming Down, which is more like a hard rock version of the Cult that I really like this song when I first heard it. The rest of the album is nothing like that. So, I have another single for the song Star, which is kind of like your classic cult type song. And then of course the album itself, the songs on here, one of my favorite ones is actually called Black Sun, and I'm pretty sure Garden did a song at the same time called Black Hole Sun.
Yeah.
Not that, but this is really kind of talking about, I don't want to go too deep into this subject, but I noticed a lot of my albums, there's sort of the themes of child abuse and from within the family, Motley Crue, Nine Inch Nails, The Cult, a few bands, even maybe Alice Cooper kind of touched on some of these themes. So, but yeah, really get into this album. Ian's really not lost any of his fire in performances. It's still Ian Astbury, and they're still doing it's not like they kind of forgot about the Electric and Sonic Temple era. So on tours for this album, they're still doing those songs, but a different kind of 5-piece. And they have some of these more contemplative songs. There's one of the songs he actually talks about they lost the loss of River Phoenix and Kurt Cobain and a few of these more known celebrities at the time. So Anyway, if you get a chance to find this one, it's on vinyl. This is one of the few cult things I don't actually own on vinyl, so I'm really on the lookout for their self-titled album. That's my number 2 for 1994.
Just a couple things that come to mind with that. It does not sound like a Bob Rock production, if I recall correctly. Not necessarily. No. And also, didn't they do another album in more recent years that kind of looks like that cover?
Oh, okay, yeah, you probably think of Choice of Weapon.
Yeah.
Yeah, the stark white background and then the picture of the Aboriginal or the First Nations person. Yeah.
Cool. All right. John, your
Okay.
number 2.
My number 2, and this is definitely not number 2. This is a wonderful, wonderful album, but I don't actually have a physical copy of any longer. But if there was a band that was going to carry on the metal name in the 90s and take it to all kinds of different extremes, look no further than Pantera. And 1994's, which came out March 22nd, 1994 on Elektra Records, Far Beyond Driven, which would go number 1, would be
I was gonna say
platinum.
debuted at number 1, which was crazy.
Went to number 1 on the Billboard 200, was certified platinum. I think certified platinum up in y'all's neck of the woods. I would see this tour in 1995, early 1995, with Typo Negative opening. There's my pick I was able to snag at the show. I think that says Far Beyond Drunk. So there's of course there's the back of it. I think this was the first album that he started going by Dime Bag instead of Diamond. But anyway, you just get bludgeoned over the head with Strength Beyond Strength to lead off this album. Just bludgeons you over the head, and then it slows down, this ridiculous breakdown. And then, of course, you get Becoming, you get 5 Minutes Alone, I'm Broke, and you get all these just ridiculously groovy, heavy riff tracks that are just amazing. And then they end with a really good cover, Planet Caravan by Black Sabbath. Really good. I mean, and here you get Phil actually, you don't get the, oh boy, you get Phil kind of trying to sing again, which is kind of nice. You don't get that gruff, aggressive sound that you get off this whole album, and even in Vulgar Display of Power. You get this nice tender voice, and it really sounds good. Dime sounds really good on this whole track. I think they did a fantastic job. But yeah, got to see Pantera twice. Was very thrilled to see them come to the town I was living in at the time, because not a whole lot came to my neck of the woods at that time. I remember going home smelling like I had, like, there was cigarette smoke, drug smoke, booze flavor, smoke machine flavor. God only knows what other smokes were going around. I rank when I got home, but boy, that was a great show. And rest in peace, Dime and Vinny.
Cool. So my number 2, Matt's already mentioned. Yeah, I think it was just Matt. And I had mentioned that there were 2 bands that put albums out right around the same time. One did okay. That was Tesla. And then, unfortunately, Cinderella, Still Climbing. I got into Cinderella with Long Cold Winter, and, went back about Night Songs, listened to both those albums all the time. This is kind of 90s looking, and it's also, it could be one of the first ones I got where the tray was cleared, had the name of the band on it. They're still in a major label, like they were contracted. That's probably the only reason this exists, is because they owed Mercury one more album, but there was no promotion done whatsoever for this album. This album completely died. And it's a shame, because it's just another good Cinderella album. They did not do a bad album. And Tom Kiefer, both of his solo albums might as well be Cinderella albums, because they just pick right up where these left off. This is a little bit more like Heartbreak Station, but it's a little rougher. As usual, Fred Coury did not play on this album. I don't know what the problem was, but actually Kenny Aronoff plays the drums on this. It's one of the first times I remember seeing his name pop up because he was a longtime drummer for Mellencamp, but he played on the John Bon Jovi Blaze of Glory album. He's on that, but then he played on all the drum tracks in here, except for the last track, which is Hot and Bothered, which had already come out, of course, on the Wayne's World soundtrack. Now, I don't know the story behind this. I have no idea how Cinderella landed on such a big soundtrack in 1992. I have no idea how that happened. But anyway, this is just a good, solid Cinderella album. There's good rockers, there's good ballads, there's bluesy stuff. Some of these songs like Freewheelin' and Talk is Cheap date back to 1985. They've been kicking around for a long time. This Tom sounds good on this album. On this tour, he would have, really all kinds of vocal problems, and he had vocal problems for many years. So it was a long time before Cinderella started to tour again. I had the pleasure of seeing them in 2000. They were fantastic. And this album let me give you a good microcosm for how this music had fallen out of favor. Okay. Friend of mine, Mike Stackhouse, who was one of the contributors to the Y&T book. I ended up for a very brief time in early 95 moving to Cape Breton to try to find a job at the local radio station down there. Did not work out. It was a life lesson. Let's put it that way. But because they were on Mercury Records, Cinderella you'd still see their songs on the samplers that came out at the time. And I remember Mike having this conversation with one of the guys at the radio station, and they stuck All Comes Down, very last song in like a 17-song compilation. Like, it wasn't a focus track, but it was on there. And this guy was kind of snickering about it. And so Mike puts it on because Mike didn't care. And he's mouthing along with the lyrics, and this guy looks at him. I can't think of his name, and it doesn't matter. And he said, in all earnestness and seriousness, he goes, "You really do like this stuff, don't you?" Like, that's how, that's how far down it had gone. But great album. Will, who's normally on here with us, really liked this album. I think this was his number one, if he could have come up with enough for a list. I said, don't worry, I'm going to talk about Still Climbing. So that's my number two. Now, wow, we're up to the big ones. I know Matt's. Matt probably knows mine, but let's see what Jex's number one is.
Probably a little unexpected, I would say. I don't know if people are going to expect this. This is a lot of sentimental value, a lot of nostalgia, which was
Mariah Carey's Christmas album. I know it's.
You beat me to it. Spoiler alert. No, folks. It's a little album debut by Weezer.
Okay.
I love this, but again, like I said, a lot of sentimental. I remember. I actually have memories of this coming out in '94 because I have two older sisters, right? 5 years older, 8 years older. So the one who's 5 years older, she would have been like 13, 14. So much music was on all the time in our house. So that's why I knew what was going on around this time, even though I wasn't actively buying music. But I remember Weezer. I remember the terrific video for Buddy Holly. Again, Spike Jonze, as we talked about, Beastie Boys, made the Happy Days. I remember it blowing my mind because I knew about Happy Days at that age. I was like, it was crazy. I'm like, how did they do this?
I still to this day, I don't know how they did it so seamlessly.
For the time, it was well done. Yeah. But Say It Ain't So, again, was played on much music. So I knew about Weezer. My sister was into them. But again, I wasn't actively buying music. And then, Pinkerton came out 2 years later, and they kind of disappeared. I didn't hear about Weezer for a while. Now, fast forward to 2001. Now I'm a teenager. I turned 16 in 2001. And I remember that summer seeing the video for Hash Pipe. Like, who is this? And then I see Rivers. I'm like, this is Weezer. Like, this is cool. Like, where have they been? They're back. So for that year, for my birthday, I got the Green album, and I played it to death. I loved it. And I'm like, I need to go back to the beginning. So I went to Walmart and I bought this. This is the very copy I bought in 2001. And I played it, and then I played it again. And I played it again. And it's the first time that I remember in my life that I could just listen to an album front to back and not be bored. There's no filler. I love everything. It makes me happy. It just, and then being able to play it on repeat, like, this was new to me. So I think that's why it has that special place in my heart. And I needed to put it as my number one because that was the first time I remember feeling that way about an album. And, from the acoustic opening notes of My Name is Jonas all the way to the slow closer, Only in Dreams, like, I'm invested for the 41-minute duration of this album every time. And still, every time I play it now, it just brings me back, and it's great. And it's produced by Rick Ocasek of the Cars. I think the production is really well. I think it's so fitting. He's just such a fitting producer for this, what they were going for. And yeah, it is, to me, it is their best album. They've had good albums since, but I feel like they were never able to really capture what they did on here, which is a shame, but at least we have one killer album to enjoy from them. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. My number one, Weezer debut, self-titled, also known as the Blue Album.
I love how they put that covers album out a few years ago and they called it the Teal album.
Yeah, well, they have a lot of colors album. They had the Green album in 2001, and I think 2008 was the Red album, and then the Teal album.
So I'm pretty sure that that 94 was the debut of one of Matt's all-time favorite bands. Take it away. Sorry, guys. Rufus is adamant.
He's
We'll
hungry.
get through this together.
He's hungry.
So in the spring of 94, I mentioned I'd made a trip to the UK. At this time, I was still into my grunge, still into my hard rock and heavy metal. I had no idea about the musical scene was about to change, at least in the UK. So my number one, Tim already knows this, is the debut album from the Gallagher Brothers.
The other Gallagher brothers.
Yeah, Oasis definitely made. This one came out in August 29th of 1994. But in April of 1994, they released their first single, Supersonic. I think I actually have this on vinyl. Not an original, mind you, but so there's a reproduction. A lot of their artwork was done by a company called Microdot at the time. And it's kind of going back to, they really wanted to feature these really staged kind of intricate photos. I did manage to, so I've spent the last 30 years, Tim and I have been collecting vinyl records since meeting in college. So, 1992, 93. And I've spent the last almost 30 years trying to find a copy of this on vinyl. Every single record store I've ever talked to, they've never even seen a copy of this come through in Canada. So I had to bite the bullet and buy. You've got the remastered version. It's got the little white strip around the edge to know this is kind of like the reissued version. But what can I say about Oasis? And definitely maybe kicks off with the song "Rock and Roll Star," which is like their kind of motto anthem for what they would want to be, aspire to be. Of course, they weren't rock and roll stars at the time when this came out. Just a few months prior, they were playing like your local pubs in a known place called the Boardwalk, where Oasis would hone their craft. Only a few years later, they would actually be playing in front of 125,000 people at Nebworth. So their rise as this album came out was definitely meteoric. It's got all those kind of Oasis quirks, like second song, Shaker Maker. I know a girl called Elsa. She's into Alka-Seltzer. She sips it through a rain on a supersonic train. It's actually talking about a dog that they know that was into licking up stuff off the ground. But number 3 track is Live Forever. I think this one might be Noel Gallagher's favorite song that he ever wrote. It constantly appears on, the 500 best songs from the 90s, Live Forever. A few of my favorite album tracks are Up in the Sky, and one that really builds called Columbia, which you can almost kind of dance to, but it's got this kind of really cool rock riff. Of course, Oasis, if you only know a little bit about the band, you might kind of have heard that, they're just ripping off the Beatles or they're stealing other people's ideas. Noel was pretty upfront about this. One of their songs, well, Cigarettes and Alcohol, is a straight up rip off of T-Rex, that riff. And another song that they did kind of rips off Coca-Cola song, their song Shaker Maker. I'd like to buy the world a Coke. Well, Noel actually ripped that off for song Shaker. So he's unabashed about his influences. And one kind of funny thing I wanted to put out about this album, actually, one of the songs on here is about one of their friends he's mad, he's crazy, but the song is called Digsy's Dinner. But on this Canadian issue, it was released as Digsy's Diner with missing the. So Digsy's Dinner was reduced to Digsy's. Yeah, that's still one of my favorite albums of all time. I didn't get into Oasis for a few years. It wasn't until 1997 that I actually kind of discovered them and went back and bought this album. But yeah, that was without a doubt going to be my favorite album of 1994. Take it away.
Funny story.
Mm.
Funny story about Matt. You know, talking about when he got into Oasis. I thought he hated them.
I did.
And I remember when Matt first moved back to the area, and I went down to see him. He had this is going to sound. He had rented a concert of theirs from a video store,
VHS.
and I'm like, what? Anyway, yeah, that's cool. I knew that was going to be Matt's number one. No,
Yeah.
question.
All I knew about Britpop at the time, I constantly saw Blur at their video on MTV or Much Music was Girls and Boys, that song, which I still find annoying to this day. So I equated that, and then they would play Wonderwall. Now, I didn't like Wonderwall. I only kind of gave it a few seconds listen and decided I hated this band. I hated this genre. I'm not into Britpop, just based on those two songs. And yeah, I've turned a new leaf on that one. So
All right, John, you're number one.
Okay, so this will probably make Jax, you're gonna have to help me on this one. I think what's one of Ladano's friends who is all into soundtracks? Isn't that Robert?
That's
Rob,
Robert.
Rob Daniels.
Yeah.
Rob Daniels. Okay. So he'll be happy with this one because I know he's a big soundtrack guy. So early 90s, I was getting into comic books and I was getting into more violent nature types, more mature type of stuff. One thing you guys will probably have discovered in my list, there's a side of me that is like the angry, mad at the world, heavy, aggressive. And then there's this other side of, where I went into more of the Christian metal. Well, that's, the 90s is kind of is almost like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of a style of me, a person who I was and who I still am. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. But in the early 90s, I discovered this little known comic book at the time, but it had this cult following, and it was just a wonderful comic book. But the last part hadn't come out yet. I'm like, what? It was this violent, just street punk kind of, you can almost imagine, Ian Murphy from Joy Division, being this character. And then I hear, oh, they're making a movie. Oh, please no.
Oh, yeah.
Please no, don't screw this up. Please don't screw this up. But then, and at the end of March, I believe it was 93, we get this awful news.
yeah.
That Brandon Lee was killed on the set.
Yeah.
The movie would be released. I loved it, would go see it in the theater countless times, got this soundtrack. This, of course, is a vinyl reissue, just came out a few years ago, recently. But this soundtrack, my goodness, Burn from The Cure. I only know about 3 or 4 Cure songs, and Burn is one of them. And I love Burn. I absolutely love Burn. I may not know some of these other bands like Golgotha or like Machines of Loving Grace, or maybe For Love Not Least, or My Life with a Thrill Kill Cult, Medicine. I might not know some of those bands, but boy, Stone Temple Pilots with Big Empty, of course, that was on Purple. 9 Inch Nails doing the aforementioned Joy Division's Dead Souls, and an incredible version of it is that. Rage Against the Machines on here, Violent Femmes, Color Me Once, Rollins Band doing a song called Ghost Rider, Helmet with Milk Toast, Pantera, alluded to them earlier. They do a cover on a song called The Badge. I think that was called Angry Plane, or I can't think of the name of the band that they covered that for. Anyway, how much did this get this played in my car, especially on those road trips with those aforementioned friends I talked about, that community, that we all loved this album. We all loved this movie. We loved the comic book. Anything that was Crow related especially to the original graphic comic series. Any of the sequels, forget it. The original was the one that did it for me,
Yeah.
but this was it. And it still is one of my favorite movies, much to my wife's chagrin. I absolutely still love the soundtrack. There you go.
Cool, very cool. Just to give you an example, this actually ties in quite well. We're talking about the year and popular culture and how things were. Well, I'd mentioned getting into Kiss at a time when who was getting into Kiss in 93, 94? Well, Halloween 1994, me and three buddies of mine decide to dress up as Kiss. Who's dressing up as Kiss in 1994? But we did. I got a wig. I was Gene. And somewhere out there, I've posted it before this. We recreated the Creatures of the Night album because our buddy Dwayne dressed as Eric and not Peter, just to be different. Anyway, my point is, we drove around. We went to this restaurant to go have something to eat, and every time we ran into someone, this will show you how Kiss's star had fallen by 1994. Everyone thought we were dressed up as the Crow. That's what we were going for, not Kiss.
Wow.
Nobody did. Like, just, I know it's hard to believe now, but that's number one. That's how unpopular Kiss were in 94. That's how popular the Crow was. So there you
Yep.
go.
Yep.
When you started to say that, I'm like, I know exactly what to respond with. So my number one, Rufus is gonna eat my sleeve here. But to his credit, this has been a long episode, but it's been a great episode. My number one for 94, never a band that I would ever thought would have a number one album for me, because they've never been a favorite of mine. I've always just liked them. For the most part, I think they're a bunch of jerks, not nice guys, but when the music is good, the music is good. And I remember making this list and moving things around. I'm like, can this be right? Is this really my number one? Yeah, it's my number one album for 1994 is the self-titled Motley Crue album. This is a fantastic hard rock album by any name. Doesn't matter the name that's on the tin. And Matt's right. I bought this new in Canada, and it's got the red logo, and on the side is yellow. And the cassette is red on the side. But I remember seeing the video to Hooligan's Holiday, and granted, people have been waiting, right? Because Dr. Feelgood was huge, 5 million seller. I really liked when they put Decade of Decadence out. Primal Scream is probably my favorite single Motley Crue song. I liked that direction they were going in. It was a little smarter, and I just thought it was heavy and it had groove, and I thought I was excited for the future, right? And then, of course, Vince leaves, right? Well, I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. I said this on the Contrarians because I argued this is my favorite Motley Crue album. Vince was always the weak link in Motley Crue. Because despite what his reputation would have you think, Tommy's actually a really good drummer, a really inventive drummer. I don't think he's got a single drum performance any better on one album than on here. Bob Rock captured him really well on it. Some of the fills he does are just really smart, really cool, and not the expected thing. Nikki Sixx, he'll be the first to tell you, is a great songwriter, and he came up with a bunch of great songs here. Mick Mars was always an underrated guitar player. This monolithic tone that you don't mistake for anybody else. He's a scary dude. And then you had Vince Neil. Sorry. And listen, my favorite Motley Crue album of the original lineup is probably Too Fast for Love. That's a great album. I'm a fan. I'm just saying that when this album came out, it was the right album. It's actually the first Motley Crue album I ever bought. I remember thinking, I think I'm going to buy this. And also there was that part of me where people were waiting for them to fail, right? Because it wasn't cool anymore. No, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to help out. The album went gold, but I mean, it ended up in the delete bins, and it's too bad. It's a good album. Power to the Music, great opener. Hooligan's Holiday is fantastic. Love Shine is a cool acoustic song. Smoke the Sky. Like, it's actually kind of an easy riff, but it's fun. It's a drop D riff. Anyway, the one song on here I always thought maybe Vince would sound okay doing is Poison Apples. That always sounded to me like a glammy kind of, I could picture that. They never did. I mean, you know, unlike say when Bruce Dickinson came back to Iron Maiden, they never revisited this stuff, you know. Ian Gillan never sang any of the David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes stuff either. So, but a good album. Welcome to the Numb, Till Death Do Us Part. This is a good album. Really good album. It's a creepy song, but Uncle Jack is good musically. And, you know, one thing I learned from looking at the liner notes, Mick Mars was really built back then.
Yeah.
I'm gonna leave it at that. One thing I wish I had done, which a couple buddies of mine did, is send away for the Quaternary, because that's rare. That's kind of expensive to get. All the songs are around somewhere, but I kind of wish I'd have sent away for it. But anyway, I was all on board. I thought that you know, I thought it was a good album. Of course, it wasn't destined to last. When Matt was talking about reading something from the dirt, I thought he was going to reference John Corabi, and this was towards the end of his tenure with the crew before they brought Vince back. And it's just a one-word quote. I think it's the only quote on the whole page. Would you guys make up your effing minds?
Yeah.
So, and as a side note to this, I've always been a big fan of the first Union album too. But
Yes.
yeah, that's it. That's the album I like the most from 1994 is the self-titled Motley Crue album, as crazy as it might sound.
I learned yesterday from Mike Ladano. Actually, we were talking about Motley Crue, that self-titled, and he said that if you got the red or the yellow, they had different booklets, different pictures, and everything inside of them.
Oh
I didn't
yeah,
know.
I bet you they do. Yeah, and it's another thing. It was one of those kind of annoying '90s tropes where they printed some of the lyrics, but not all.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all completely out of order too.
Yeah.
In
There's songs in there, like there's a song called 10,000 Miles that's not on the album that there's lyrics to. But anyway, yeah. So there you go, guys. My dog is hungry. My other dog would be hungry too. But guys, this has been a lot of fun. This has been a marathon episode. Really, really great variety of picks. I mean, I like the fact that people bring stuff to the table other than the stuff I usually talk about. So 1994, man, interesting year in music. And for the most part, a lot of the stuff we've talked about is still, people still talk about it today, but Jex brought some obscurities. Thank you for that. Anyway, want to thank everybody for watching and want to thank Jex and Matt and John for doing this. Definitely want to do this again. And guys, thanks so much for doing this. And everybody, we will see you all later on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Go listen to something from 1994.